The courtroom was colder than the leftover lasagna I forgot to reheat last week. But maybe it wasn't the temperature. Maybe it was the way everyone in that room stared at me like they'd already written my guilty verdict in Sharpie. On one side, Officer Thomas Grayson, a middle-aged cop with the kind of smug confidence that made you want to punch him and then send him a get-well-soon card. On the other side, me, Justin Carter, 28 years old, college graduate, part-time caregiver for my diabetic mom, and apparently, the guy who stole $50 worth of groceries. Spoiler alert, I didn't. But hey, who needs facts when you've got a face like mine? Growing up on Atlanta's west side, I thought I'd seen every kind of bullshit the world could throw at a black man. But this was next level. I wasn't some troublemaker fresh out of juvie. I was the guy who worked double shifts just to keep the lights on at home. The guy who spent his Saturdays helping his mom bake French toast because it was the only thing that made her smile these days. But none of that mattered. Not when the system had already decided I was guilty the moment I walked into that store. It all started on what should have been a normal day. I was picking up eggs and bread for my mom at the local grocery store. Simple, right? Wrong. As I reached for the eggs, I felt that weird, prickly sensation, like someone was staring at me. I turned around and sure enough, the store's rent-a-cop was watching me like I was planning to stuff a flat-screen television into my pocket. I plastered on my best polite smile, the one that screams, "I am totally harmless, please don't call the cops." "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice so friendly it could have sold Girl Scout cookies. He just sniffed and walked off, probably to call in backup for the suspicious black man near the dairy aisle. Whatever. I paid for my groceries, grabbed my receipt, and headed out. 2 blocks later, I heard the siren. Before I could even process what was happening, a cop car skidded onto the sidewalk in front of me. Out stepped Officer Grayson, looking like he'd just won a lifetime supply of donuts. "You matched the description of a suspect," he said, his hand resting on his holster like I was about to pull out a bazooka. "Now let me translate that for you. You are black and nearby, so close enough. I should have kept my mouth shut, but my brain had other plans." "Description," I said, raising an eyebrow. "What's that? Tall, dark, and handsome?" Grayson didn't laugh. Instead, he slammed me against the hood of his car and cuffed me like I was on the FBI's most wanted list. "You are under arrest for shoplifting," he barked. "Shoplifting? Are you kidding me? I have the receipt right here." "Oh, sure," he said with a smirk. "And I bet it's written in crayon." There's a special kind of rage that comes with being treated like a criminal for simply existing. By the time we got to the station, I was too angry to even feel scared. They processed me, tossed me in a holding cell, and acted like they just nabbed Al Capone. Fast forward to my first court appearance. Grayson strutted in like he was auditioning for a cop drama, and the prosecutor presented their evidence. Grainy security footage of a guy who vaguely looked like me slipping items into his jacket. Except, I wasn't wearing a jacket that day. "That's not me," I said, my voice calm but firm. The prosecutor snorted. "You expect us to believe that?" "Sure. I also expect you to believe the moon landing wasn't fake, but here we are." The judge glared at me, but I caught a couple of jurors fighting back smiles. Small victories. Meanwhile, Grayson sat there, radiating smugness like a damn space heater. Here is the thing about Grayson. He wasn't just some random cop. He was the cop. The guy who saved kittens from trees and stopped jaywalkers in their tracks. The local news loved him. But what they didn't know, or chose to ignore, was his side hustle. Framing people who couldn't fight back. And guess who just made his highlight reel? As the hearing wrapped up, I caught Grayson smirking at me from across the room. He thought he'd already won. I clenched my fists under the table, silently vowing that if this man wanted a fight, he'd get one. Because one thing Grayson didn't know about me, I don't back down. The courtroom buzzed like a hornet's nest. Everyone whispered, side-eyed, and shifted in their seats like they were about to witness the second coming of Judge Judy. Meanwhile, I sat at the defendant's table, trying not to look like I was 5 seconds away from flipping it over. Across the room, Officer Grayson perched smugly, his arms crossed like he was the hero in a bad cop movie. The guy radiated the kind of arrogance that made you want to throw something heavy at his head, preferably my case file. The prosecutor started their opening argument, rattling off how I'd allegedly swiped $50 worth of groceries. $50. That's what this circus was about. They made it sound like I'd walked out with the Mona Lisa under my arm. Their big piece of evidence? A blurry, low-res security video that made 1980s home movies look like 4K masterpieces. On the screen, a figure, a tall black man who might have been me if you squinted hard enough, was seen stuffing items into his jacket. The only problem? I wasn't wearing a jacket that day. I pointed this out to my lawyer, who gave me a look that said, "Please stop helping, you are making it worse." "Your Honor," my lawyer began, his voice so shaky it could have doubled as a milk frother. "We'd like to argue that this video is inconclusive." "Inconclusive?" the prosecutor sneered. "You can see the defendant right there." I couldn't help myself. "Where? In Pixel Land?" The judge shot me a glare that could have melted steel. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you let your attorney speak for you." "Sure thing, Your Honor," I said, plastering on a smile that could have earned me a place in a toothpaste commercial. Grayson, of course, ate it all up. He leaned back in his seat, looking so pleased with himself you'd think he'd just won a free cruise. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't about me. This was about him. Grayson didn't just want to prove I was guilty, he wanted to make an example out of me. I was his trophy case, the cherry on top of his already inflated ego. But I wasn't going down without a fight. After the hearing, I called up my buddy Leon. Leon's a tech guy, like the kind who could hack into NASA if he felt like it. We met up at a diner where I spilled everything: the arrest, the video, the fact that Grayson seemed way too invested in a petty shoplifting case. Leon raised an eyebrow. "You think he's framing you?" "I don't think," I said, stabbing a fry into my ketchup with enough force to scare the waitress. "I know." Leon smirked. "Well, lucky for you. I love a good conspiracy theory." Over the next few days, Leon started digging. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, trying to survive the court of public opinion. The local news picked up the story, and let me tell you, nothing brings out the worst in people like the comments section. I was everything from a career criminal to a waste of taxpayer money. One genius even suggested that I should have been arrested just for wearing sneakers with mismatched laces. Real Pulitzer-worthy stuff. Then, things got weird. One night, as I was walking home from my mom's place, I noticed a car trailing me. Not just any car, his car. Grayson. He wasn't even trying to be subtle about it. The headlights practically burned holes in my back as he crawled along behind me. My heart raced, but I forced myself to keep walking, my hands clenched into fists. When I reached my apartment, I turned around and stared straight at the car. He rolled down the window, gave me a smirk, and said, "Careful, Carter. Wouldn't want you to get into any more trouble." I didn't respond. What could I say? The man held all the cards and he knew it. But that smirk made my blood boil. I went upstairs and paced my tiny living room like a caged animal, trying to figure out my next move. The next morning, Leon called me, his voice practically vibrating through the phone. "You are not going to believe this," he said. "But your boy Grayson? He's been up to some shady shit." "Shady how?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Turns out, Grayson had a history of making cases disappear, cases involving people who looked a lot like me. Leon dug up old complaints, court records, even a few whispered rumors from people too scared to go on the record. It was all starting to make sense. This wasn't about justice. This was about power. Grayson wasn't just playing dirty. He was building a damn empire out of it. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. If Grayson thought he could bury me under his lies, he had another thing coming. It was time to start digging up the truth, and I wasn't planning on playing nice. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to blow its lid. The prosecutor stood tall, like they just pulled a royal flush, and announced, "Your Honor, the state calls Kevin Anderson to the stand." And in he walked, tall, confident, wearing a sharp suit that screamed, "I am better than you." But what hit me like a sucker punch to the gut? The dude looked like me. Not just a little, a lot. Same height, same build, same skin tone. Even his haircut was on point, like he'd taken my picture to the barber. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. Then reality slapped me across the face. This wasn't a coincidence. This was some next-level, soap opera-level setup. Kevin sat down, looked the jury square in the eye, and said, "I saw Mr. Carter steal those groceries." Boom. The courtroom erupted like someone had set off fireworks. Gasps, whispers, the whole 9 yards. Meanwhile, I was stuck there, frozen like a deer in headlights, thinking, what the actual fuck? The judge banged her gavel. "Order! We will have order in this courtroom." My lawyer leaned over, his face pale. "Justin, who is this guy?" "I don't know," I hissed back, "but he's lying through his teeth." Kevin continued, his voice smooth and steady, like he'd practiced this story in front of a mirror 100 times. He painted a picture of me or someone who looked like me stuffing items into a jacket and bolting for the door. It was detailed, precise, and completely made up. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "That's a damn lie," I blurted. The judge's eyes snapped to me. "Mr. Carter, you will remain silent, or I'll hold you in contempt of court." "Sorry, Your Honor," I muttered, though I didn't mean a word of it. Kevin went on, adding little flourishes to his story like he was auditioning for a crime drama. I could see the jury eating it up, nodding along like they were watching a true crime documentary. And Grayson? Oh, he looked downright giddy, like a kid on Christmas morning. But something about Kevin's performance didn't sit right. His voice was too calm. His words felt rehearsed, like he was reading off a script only he could see. And his eyes? They never met mine. When the prosecutor wrapped up, my lawyer finally got his chance to cross-examine. He started with the basics. "Mr. Anderson, how long have you lived in this town?" "About 6 months," Kevin replied. "And where were you on the day of the alleged incident?" Kevin rattled off some generic answer about being at the grocery store, picking up milk or bread or whatever. But the more he talked, the more cracks started to show. He hesitated when asked about specific details, like where exactly he was standing or what aisle he saw me in. Then my lawyer went for the jugular. "Mr. Anderson, have you ever met Officer Grayson?" Kevin's eyes darted to the prosecutor for a split second, tiny, almost imperceptible tell. "No," he said, but his voice wavered. The lawyer pounced. "Are you sure about that?" Kevin stammered. "Yes, I am sure." I could feel the tension in the room shift. The jury leaned in, their skepticism finally kicking in. Even the judge narrowed her eyes like she was sniffing out something fishy. But the kicker came when my lawyer pulled out a photo. "This is from Officer Grayson's retirement party last year," he said, holding it up for the court to see. There, in the background, was Kevin, clinking glasses with none other than Grayson himself. Gasps filled the room again. I almost laughed out loud. It was like watching a Jenga tower collapse in slow motion. Kevin's face went pale. I don't remember that," he stammered. My lawyer didn't miss a beat. Funny, because it seems pretty memorable to me. Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his smirk finally fading. I couldn't help but think, checkmate, asshole. But it wasn't over. Not yet. As the court recessed for the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was far from finished. Grayson wasn't the type to go down without a fight, and if Kevin was willing to lie under oath, who knew what else they had up their sleeves? Still, for the first time in days, I felt like I had a shot. Maybe, just maybe, I could turn this whole mess around. But I had to be ready, because the next move, it was going to be a big one. The courtroom was like the stage of a Broadway show, on opening night, packed, tense, and buzzing with anticipation. You could practically hear the collective breath being held as the judge walked in. This was it, the final showdown. On one side, me, Justin Carter, the guy fighting for his life. On the other, Officer Thomas Grayson, looking like a used car salesman who just realized someone checked under the hood. Kevin, the knockoff version of me, was back on the stand, but his confidence had crumbled into dust. The dude was sweating bullets, and I could tell he was mentally drafting his "it wasn't my fault" speech for later. The prosecutor looked like they were holding on to hope by a thread, but even they had that "this is not going well" vibe. My lawyer stood up, cool as a cucumber. He had that little grin, the kind that said, "You are about to watch me burn this place down, and it's going to be glorious." "Mr. Anderson," my lawyer began, his voice dripping with mock politeness, "you've testified that you saw Mr. Carter commit the alleged crime, correct?" Kevin nodded, but his eyes darted around the room like a squirrel in a dog park. "Yes, that's correct. And yet you also testify that you've never met Officer Grayson before this trial. Is that also correct?" Kevin hesitated. "Yes." "Interesting," my lawyer said, pacing like he owned the place. "Because this photo from Officer Grayson's retirement party tells a very different story. That's you in the background, isn't it?" The projector lit up with the photo, and there it was, Kevin clinking glasses with Grayson. The courtroom buzzed like a kicked beehive. Kevin's face went pale, and Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Kevin stammered, Don't remember that." "You don't remember?" My lawyer tilted his head like a cat playing with a mouse. Because I'd think sharing champagne with the officer who conveniently brought you in as a witness might be pretty memorable. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. The jury wasn't buying it, and the judge let my lawyer keep going. "Your Honor," he said, "we have another piece of evidence to submit." And that's when Leon's masterpiece hit the screen. The grainy video showed Kevin and Grayson meeting in the parking lot of the precinct. The timestamp was just 2 days before Kevin's testimony. In the footage, they were talking, shaking hands, and exchanging what looked an awful lot like an envelope. The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, even a whispered, "Holy shit," from someone in the back. The judge banged her gavel like she was trying to shatter it. "Order, I will have order," she barked. But even she looked a little shaken. Kevin buried his face in his hands, while Grayson looked like he'd just swallowed a cactus. My lawyer, meanwhile, was having the time of his life. "Mr. Anderson," he said, his tone now razor-sharp, "can you explain what was in that envelope?" Kevin didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said everything. "And Officer Grayson," my lawyer continued, turning his attention to the cop who had orchestrated this whole mess, "care to comment?" Grayson's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to talk his way out of it. But before he could open his mouth, the judge intervened. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Mr. Anderson, Officer Grayson, you are both under investigation for perjury and conspiracy. This trial is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. Well, almost. As the courtroom emptied, I stayed behind, watching as Grayson was approached by internal affairs officers. The look on his face when they pulled out a pair of handcuffs, priceless. "Hey, Grayson," I called out as they led him away. "Careful not to smudge your paint." He shot me a look that could have melted steel, but I just smiled. By the time I stepped outside, the weight that had been crushing me for weeks was finally gone. Sure, I'd been through hell, but I wasn't just walking out a free man, I was walking out with my dignity intact. And Grayson? He was walking into the kind of spotlight he'd been avoiding his whole career. Sometimes the system works, and sometimes you've just got to tear it apart with your bare hands to make it happen.